Welcome to the Modern Classrooms Project podcast. Each week, we bring you discussions with educators on how they use blended, self-paced, and mastery-based learning to better serve their students. We believe teachers learn best from each other, so this is our way of lifting up the voices of leaders and innovators in our community. This is the Modern Classrooms Project podcast. Hello and welcome to the Modern Classrooms Project podcast. My name is Zach Diamond, and I'm a high school media production teacher in Washington, D.C., and, of course, a Modern Classrooms implementer. And today, I'm joined by Carson Hickox, a middle school social studies teacher and a DMCE and mentor. Welcome, Carson. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going great. I'm so excited to have you. We were emailing back and forth a bunch before this, and I'm really excited for this conversation. We're going to talk about sort of your first year implementing and how it transformed your teaching in your class. But before we get started with that, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself? Tell us about who you are and how you started your MCP journey that has culminated in you becoming a mentor.
Yeah, it's been quite an adventure. I have to go. It's kind of like a Captain Underpants book. To tell you this story, I'm going to have to tell you this story. So I've been teaching for 6 years, all social studies, and all in Oregon, where I live right now. So I live in Redmond, Oregon, which is about 25 miles north of Bend in Central Oregon. And my wife and I moved here in 2019, and we have 3 little kids. And we were living in the Valley and moved over here. And so so a lot of the process of becoming a Modern Classrooms mentor and teacher, it's kind of like I think a building for a few years. So when I first started, and this is kind of the interesting thing about Oregon, we don't have a social studies test or an assessment that goes along with social studies for the state. Some states do, we don't. And so as a result, sometimes we get curriculum that doesn't have a lot of how to teach social studies. We'll get a book and we're kind of going from that kind of a mindset. And so when I first started teaching my first year here in Central Oregon, I was in a rural district and just kind of started teaching. And I was like, I don't really know how to do any of this. I think my teaching program wasn't quite ready to step into that. And so over time, it was piecing together different pieces of curriculum. But even in the process of teaching social studies, I felt like I wasn't able to do the things I really wanted to do in social studies, have meaningful discussions and conversations. I felt like it was a lot of notes and it was a lot of read this text and answer these vocabulary terms. And it was all kind of jumbled. And and then I started teaching my first year that I started teaching in March, it was COVID. So I got started teaching, and then it was immediately pivoted to online learning, which was a whole bag of many things. So yeah, that was my first year. So for me, what was normal in teaching was to spend half your year online. So I didn't really have a normal year until 3 years later when everything kind of settled down. There was, we weren't working through a lot of the different procedural stuff around COVID, and we were able just to go from September to spring as a full year. So I only had I had 2 years of teaching that before. So I taught in that district for a couple years, about 4 years, and kind of got my feet underneath me. And then that we lived in Redmond, and I worked in this other district. So I was driving 25 minutes, back and forth through kind of these backcountry roads to get there, which I know for most people that are living in an urban center, 25-minute commute is not a big deal. But for me, it was we were driving home, and so I got an opportunity to move over to teach in Redmond, which is where I teach now. And it's 5 minutes from my house. And so, but anyway, so I taught the same way. Yeah, no, imagine just being just walk out the door and there I am, It's not quite that simple, but that's fine. But I could ride my bike, which is great. That's a new thing. So, but yeah, so I started teaching here, and it was really interesting. So I felt like I'd finally kind of found what I was comfortable in teaching, or in the other district. I had notes, and it was quiz at the end of the week, and see what you know. And then it was all right, you don't know it, but I don't know what to do with that. So we're just going to keep going and kind of keep progressing forward and have kids retake stuff over and over again. And it was for what it was fine. And the kids liked the class, and I had a good relationship with the kids. And so it wasn't a bad thing. It just was, I felt like that's kind of what social studies was going to be for me. And so I got to the school I taught at now. And I remember this vividly in my mind. I came into class and I just started teaching the same way I had taught before. And I was like, this is not going to work. I just knew, I was like, this is not going to go well. So I just started thinking about different ways that what I could do differently. Because it was the first time that I think in my entire teaching career, I saw just like the full breadth of different skill sets in kids and different ability levels. And so it was kind of jarring. I was very much like, oh man, every kid's in like a different spot, and we're trying to do notes, and it's just like it's a nightmare. And so I was like, I'm not sure how to approach this. And when I started in the district, they had opened up this idea of proficiency-based grading, which I had heard of before, but I didn't fully understand. They were really kind of pushing it when we first got to the district. And so I decided to kind of jump in with proficiency-based grading, having no idea like what that meant, which is going to be like a theme throughout this podcast. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm just going to do it. And so I just kind of jumped in doing it. And so I had this like idea of proficiency-based grading and like evaluating kids on their progress and not necessarily like, recall and things like that. And that was kind of so I was already kind of in that process of thinking about that. And so when I got up in front of all the kids and just realized it wasn't going to work, I was like, we need to start over completely. And I just got on Google and was like, how do you set up a proficiency-based classroom, which I should have done 2 weeks before and didn't do that, which took me to Jennifer Gonzalez's Cult of Pedagogy podcast. And I think Kareem was on there talking about a mastery-based classroom. And so I went down that rabbit hole and was like, this sounds like exactly what I want to do. And so I watched the YouTube video, I did the whole thing, and got super interested in it. And then I just kind of came in the next day and was like, okay, we're doing this, and just told the kids, hey, we're doing this model. And I had no idea. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just like, let's just see what happens, which was a terrible idea, but I was just I was ready to do something different. And that's how it got started. And so in like November of last year, I was just like, we're doing this. And I think I told the kids something like, this is the last time we'll all be working on the same thing in this class. It's going to be totally different from now on. And that wasn't the case, but man, it was a wild experience. And so last year was a lot. And then, obviously in the fall, I also started doing an admin licensure program. So I was in these two different things. And I was like coming home and I was just working on curriculum, and I was like working on stuff for licensure stuff. And so,
woo, yeah. And the 3 kids too. That's a lot. That's wild. This was last year.
Yeah. It was too much. Definitely was way too much, but I don't know. My mindset was, and this isn't necessarily like, I don't know if this is like a healthy way to view it, but I knew that doing something different was going to cost me something. Like it was going to cost time. It was going to be hard. I just knew that. And so my hope was that I would find some more sustainable rhythms. So now after that first year, we've found like a better pattern of how to do things. And my admin program has lightened up a lot. But I think I knew that it was, when you're trying to do something different and you're trying to really get into like what it means to differentiate, because differentiation is like a term we'd like toss around, and we're like, oh, differentiate, and you're as a teacher, you're like, what am I supposed to do, make 5 different lessons? I don't even know how to do that. I'm like, this is impossible. And so the only way and I think in my first year, it was very much learning the structure of the model. It was like, what do kids need to be successful in this model? What works and what doesn't work? And over the summer, so anyway, to go back, like it was a lot. Being up late, making lesson plans. Because I mean, again, in social studies, we don't have a curriculum, so we're building the whole thing from the ground up. We're using some History Alive curriculum, we're using some National Geographic curriculum. We're really figuring out how to do that, and we're also figuring out, okay, what kids like and what they don't like, and we're getting feedback from kids. Say, what do you think about this? Like, and we're seeing kids really enjoy it. And so my 8th graders last year, I think we had a lot of like learning experiences from that. My 7th graders came in this year having done the model before, and just rolled right into it, and it was just like a natural, so I loop with my 7th graders, so they come up to me at 8th grade, and then I have them in the group of 7th graders. So I have them 2 years in a row, which is awesome for teaching the model. So so that's how things got started in MCP, and it was a lot, but it was really fun, I think. And I was really thankful for one of my colleagues in like January of last year came to me. We were both just kind of like, man, I don't want to teach the way that we're going. We need to change stuff. It's not going. And he jumped in with me, and we've been doing it ever since. And he started the same year, the same school. And he's been a huge, huge blessing to me, just because just divvying up the workload and just having someone to talk to about like how to do this. And he's an old language arts teacher. He's just like a legend. And so I'm like, his knowledge of skills and how to do that at social studies has been really great. And so that was definitely, it would have been a lot harder to do it on my own again. But even so, I was like, I'm committed. I'm not going back to what was before, but I think we've kind of adopted things now and kind of figured out how this model supports these different things. And so I feel like it's been, it was a crazy first year. But up late, making making like mastery trackers, and then at midnight being like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I doing this to myself? But at the same time, seeing the value in it, seeing kids use it, and seeing kids kind of own their learning a lot more, I think was the most rewarding part of it. So
Yeah.
That was a lot. That was a lot of talking, but
No. But yeah, like it's interesting because you talked about how like you knew it would be a lot of work. You maybe even knew it would be too much, right? But like at the same time, you also knew that something had to change, right? Like it's so amazing how much of a difference a school environment can make, right? Like you come into the new school and you're like, wow, this is not working. Like you just know, right? And yeah, I mean, so that was going to be my question, right? Like, how did that first year go? And I'm hearing some of that, right? Like, clearly it was a lot of work, diving in kind of like mid-year, just like right into it. But clearly you stuck with it, right? Like you've gone on to become a DMCE and a mentor in a pretty short time, right? Like, and so obviously the model provided value for you, and you were sort of starting to get at that. Like, talk more about the impact that you've seen, that how your students have responded, right? Like, why do you think that you and the students maybe also have responded so positively, even within that like sort of chaotic little world that you had last year?
Yeah. Well, I have to give the students a lot of credit because for all the knocks on middle schoolers, they're really forgiving and they're really like gracious, and sometimes I look at them and I'm like, you guys have such a I mean, they're what's going on within them and within their like minds and stuff like that is so outside of like as an adult what you can rationally comprehend. Because I'm like, I don't remember anything about middle school. I'm like, I don't remember a thing.
I'm the exact same way.
Right. I'm just like, what happened? So I think this, to see them kind of, we talk a lot about, teachers coming back and every day facing a new day and like welcoming kids to the new day. I think they really came in with that. My eighth graders and I, we kind of butted heads a lot. And that was the downside to having kids loop is that they had a different teacher last year. And so they're coming in having me, and there's all those different, the things that go along with that are tough. And so, but towards the end of the year, we really got into a rhythm and things were fine. So yeah, I think for me, what's been really great about it is you see kids just, and sometimes like, I don't know, I almost, it's almost, you almost get kind of emotional because you kind of step back as a teacher. And when you post your guided notes video and the kids just put their headphones on and they watch their guided notes video and it's quiet and you're just like, it's happening. It's happening like right now. I'm like looking around going like, they did it. And that's rewarding from a sense of feeling like the kids are bought into it. They're not just like performing. They are into what's happening. And then I think I've seen it. So this last year, I kind of reformatted my classroom into more of like more of a space that I thought fit more with a differentiated model. So I went totally elementary and got like a little kidney table that's like a circle, half circle table. And I like sit there and I'm just like a blackjack dealer, just kind of like doling out information. So like so last year I had a student that was EL, it was an English language learner last year, and he wasn't in social studies, and he came into social studies this year. And for most of the year, he just kind of was checked out. He's just like, I'm not interested in this. And which led to me and my colleague going like, I think we're doing too much with these videos. Like, I think we're asking them to do too much. And we're like, so I'm like, oh, it's okay. It's only 5 videos, but each video was 6 minutes long. I'm like, that's a half an hour of me talking and then writing stuff down. And I was just like, that's too much for them. Like we're trying to throw too much information at them. So we slimmed it down. We got a lot shorter with it, got a lot more granular with it, shortened our lessons to make it a little bit more compact. And I sat down with this kid and I said, hey, listen, man, why don't you come sit with me back here? We'll work through it together. I'll help you. Then we switched to more of a skill focus and away from like a content focus, like using the content to teach these skills, like critical reading and things like that. I sat down with him back here, and I felt like he was a student that a lot of teachers had kind of been like, I don't know, I think he's just kind of lazy. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, I have the time now to sit down with a kid one-on-one and work with him. And we just sat down and talked through it. And I mean, the other day I came back from I had a sub the last couple of days, and I came back and I was like, the class was crazy. Got these reports from the sub, and I was like, oh man, here we go. This is going to be a whole thing. And I was like, man, you guys, you got to make sure that you're getting work done when I'm not here. And he put his hand up. He said, I got through everything. He's like, I'm on pace. Like, I'm ahead of pace. And I was like, and I think in that moment, to see him in front of his peers be so upfront about like his success, and to see him that he's like proud of that, I think if it was just that one kid that had done that, I would be that was enough to keep me going within that model. And so I've seen little snippets like that. I think, generally kids will come into class and they'll do what they're supposed to do, and you don't have to like push them too much. They just kind of know. There's some kids you got to kind of encourage along. And but I felt like what I saw was kids really taking ownership of what they wanted to do, and to see them of their own accord jumping into extension activities to work on different stuff, aspire to do information, I think has also been super rewarding. And I had a administrator, her husband subbed for me the other day, and he came and he's like, you got to see his classroom. Like, he was like, so-and-so was working. Like, he was doing work in the class. He was like doing what he was supposed to be doing. And he was like shocked by that. And my administrator came to me and said, whatever's happening in your classroom is magical. Like, I don't know what's going on, but it's magic. And I'm like, and for me, you're immersed in it. So you're like surrounded by it. So you kind of get in your own little world, and you see all the flaws, and you see the kids doing this, and you're like, oh, it's not going the way I want it to go. But I think that combination of hearing from her and seeing the student success, and seeing kids owning it, and seeing them asking questions, and seeing them get it, like seeing them, like, you see them get really granular with the information, and seeing them pick up on it. Because it's not just the blended learning, right? It's the mastery-based learning. It's like they're mastering skills, and you're seeing that happen, and you're seeing it before your eyes. You're just kind of watching this process happen. So it's been really cool to witness, and really encouraging, I think, as a teacher, to see that happening.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like I feel like there's this sort of indescribable, although you just described it really, really well, actually, like just this sort of like wave of positivity that comes in a modern classroom, even a chaotic one. Like, sometimes a lot of stuff is, I know middle school, this is my first year teaching high school. I've been a middle school teacher up until now. And less chaos in high school. Definitely middle schoolers are more off the wall. But like, sometimes they're like that. And then sometimes they all put on their headphones and they're all doing their thing, and you're just like, do I even need to be here? Like, like, can I help any of you? I felt awkward. I remember my very first time implementing the model, and I wasn't used to this yet. They were all working. Every one of them, like everyone had, or they were all watching videos or whatever. And I was like, do you need me? Like, can I, seriously, is there anybody that I can help? I'm just here. Like, let me know if you need anything. And you made this really important distinction between authentic buy-in and just like sort of performative, I'm doing it because for whatever reason, like, you can tell, right? When all the kids are doing it, and there's this feeling of like, yeah, we're doing it because we want to do it. And I think it also speaks to your planning too, right? Like, it needs to be planned clearly and concretely, and they have to understand what to do. But yeah, definitely. I remember that moment of like, whoa, this is definitely it.
Yeah. And it's funny. I think we just don't give kids enough credit. Like, I don't think we give them enough to be like I think there's a lot of, I think even myself, I find myself having, a deficit mindset. Oh, that, they're not gonna be able to do that. Like, that's, what do you, like, it's crazy. And I'm like, but we should at least try, and they might surprise you. And like, worst case scenario, you could, it's like, they can always go back, if you want to, but I'm like, we would try to do that. And so I think, social studies is such an interesting domain for that too, because it's easy to get lost in the details. And so you're trying to help kids engage with this, meaningful and fun. Like, I find social studies enjoyable to learn and study, and the conversations that come up with it. But it's also easy to get bogged down in like, the dates and the details that you can end up kind of, I don't know, boring is not the right word. I don't want to say that, but you can end up, just getting lost in the details. And I think, forget that we're trying to give kids the skills they need to unlock future learning. And I'm like, mastery is all about that. I want them to be able to do this in the future on their own, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, so talk more about that, because this was something you mentioned, this sort of shift from content-based to skills-based teaching and learning. And I think that's really interesting in social studies because, yeah, like there is sort of, in my memory of social studies, there is sort of just like a memorize the facts kind of a thing going on, right? So like, what does that look like in social studies for you? And I guess in your modern classroom social studies class too, like talk more about that.
Yeah, I think we're still in process. Like, I think we're still learning like what that looks like, you know, and there's a lot of things I would do differently next year. I would probably teach more skills on the front end. Um, Yeah, so I have to give a lot of credit to my colleague Randy. He, being a language arts teacher, has kind of naturally, he comes from a skills background, right? So from a social studies background, we can tell you that like there's skills like analyze and evaluate and describe and compare and contrast, which is always like the one that we end up going to, like compare and contrast everything. Um, but I think there's a lot of within social studies, there's a lot of opportunities and so yeah, I'll go back. So in my admin program, we were reading two really cool books. One was like the PLC Process by Richard Dufour. I forget his name, but Dufour and Dufour. I think there's double Dufours in that name. And then there's Mike Schmocker and Mike Schmoker about a book called Focus.
I'll find them both and I'll link them in the show notes for people.
Yeah, and then the Knowledge Gap was another one that I was reading about too. And they all kind of had this theme. One was the theme of mastery. So that was like, and that was not a concept that I felt like I unpacked in my teaching program, the idea of mastering things. And I don't think I was ready to like understand that at that time. But like when you look at social studies content, it's like impossible to master content. Like you're not going to know every single date or person or event in sequence for the rest of your life. Like that, you can't master social studies content. You could certainly show that you know it. You know, like if you were like, okay, you can memorize this chronology. Sure, that's great, and I think there's value in that. But as I started listening to these books, there was these conversations around social studies has this naturally engaging curriculum and topics. You're talking about religions, you're talking about philosophies, you're talking about the rise and fall of empires and warfare and battling and economics and things like that, and trade. You're talking about the Greeks and mythology, and you're talking about our American history and the Revolutionary War, and you're doing all that stuff. And it's naturally, kids are naturally curious about that kind of stuff. And so it's about how you use that really meaningful content to teach a skill, because then you can evaluate mastery and you're not like, well, because the other part of it too is I think that like the idea of working memory is such a fascinating thing, right? You can store all this information in the back of your brain and just pluck it out when you need to, right? So I love doing trivia. I love going to a local bar and playing trivia, and I'm good at it because I have a really good memory. But not every person has that memory. You know, not everybody can just pluck information from the back of their brain and be like, here you go. This is the fact. This is the day. This is what this looked like. And so sometimes I think I taught history like trivia. And it was like, okay, what date did this happen? And then it felt like once it was over, it was just kind of gone. So, you know, you do your notes, do an activity, and there's a quiz. And that's the way I taught. And it wasn't bad. I'm sure it wasn't, you know, I had a good relationship with the kids. The kids came to school. We had a good time. It wasn't bad. But I just didn't feel like I could really know if they learned something or not. So this year we had this conversation, I was like, we got to get to teaching explicit skills. And so the first thing we did was teach like a critical reading process, how to analyze a document for evidence, which I know I just lost like half the podcast crowd just by even saying that. We're like, oh, and I'm out. So yeah, don't give up. Say, hold on, it's cool. But like that process of teaching kids how to read a document, how to read a primary source for information. And I had talked with Amy Yoakum, who's a modern classrooms mentor in Sacramento. And I kind of just picked her brain. She teaches 8th grade social studies too. And I was like, how do you do this? Like, how do you implement this? And it caused us to really think about, I feel so bad for our students in the first trimester this year because we gave them the notes for so long and there were so much writing. And I was like, this is so much information. I'm so sorry. And so and what happened was kids started to act up. They were bored. they were like, this is too much. They're starting to act out, because they're just like, this is too much. And they weren't excited about it. They weren't having fun. And that wasn't going to work for me. So in January, we kind of gutted back down to the rafters, back down to the studs again, and was like, we're going to do shorter lessons. We're going to focus on a skill throughout the entire unit. And we're going to evaluate that skill throughout with the mastery checks. So each mastery check had a component, that same skill kind of repeated along with content. So like, for instance, what do we do? So I taught this critical reading process in a guided notes. We broke down an article on the page. So I did my video. I talked about the process. I modeled it in a video for them. I did it a couple times, and then they practiced with an article. And then their mastery check was looking at a primary source and just showing me that they could do that. That was the first one. And then the second one was like, okay, here's this conversation around guerrilla warfare and the Revolutionary War. Read this article by Thomas Paine, break it down. What's he talking about? And like showing us that process kind of over and over again. So we can see throughout the unit that they were progressing towards this goal at the end. And they were going to assess them on Monday and kind of see how it's gone. And so I think that's been a lot better. I feel like the content they're really engaging with the content. They're not looking at a surface level. They're really diving into it. And we've just developed fun practices that they practice skills. And I'll tell this one story because it's a great picture of the double-edged sword of engagement. When kids are really engaged or almost like too engaged, you're like, it's almost annoying how engaged you are in this lesson. My colleague and I were in a different hall. And he has this idea, is like, okay, I think we should teach him about guerrilla warfare for the Revolutionary War. So we did our video. We taught them the guerrilla warfare tactics. We taught them what that meant. We taught them how it happened in the Revolutionary War. And then their practice was acting out guerrilla warfare, which you already know is going to be a problem. So he came in, he had a little cactus that could sing, and he zip tied it to my rafters in my classroom. And he took my Office Dundee Award and zip tied it to the rafters in his classroom. And the kids, for their Aspire to do, had to make a plan using these guerrilla tactics. And then their Aspire to do was sneak into the other classroom without getting noticed and steal the thing and bring it back. So it got out of hand. It got way too out of hand. And I should have known. I was like, okay, let's try this and see how this goes.
Definitely buy-in.
Yeah, there was a lot. They thought it was like real. They were like, this is really happening. And then we had them make a treaty afterwards. And it was like, they were so mad at each other. And Randy and I were like, because this is not real. This is not like a real thing. This is totally fake. But that's kind of what we took that on to be like, what we need is the practice needs to be meaningful. It needs to practice a skill, and it needs to, so they were doing a close reading of an article about guerrilla tactics and breaking it down, and they were practicing it. They were making it relevant. They were translating into terms that they understood. And so for us, the skill focus was the front end, be really explicit about it, and then practice really meaningful and relevant. And then their mastery check was just kind of like, hey, can you explain how these events occurred? Can you show us this document that you annotated? And so it's been a lot. It's been definitely a new perspective. But I think overall, for like evaluation and like knowing what kids know, I mean, the content is the content, and the other, you kind of either know it or not. Like you can go back, and I could sit with you and reread an article and have you write stuff down or go through a notes thing again. That's fine. But I'd much rather give you the skill that you can use in the future to unlock, future learning on your own and be more independent with your learning. So that you can, look at a document and go, oh, it's a new document. I can break it down. We'll do this process, totally, and I'll answer it.
Yeah, yeah, and same with the knowledge too, right? Like memorizing the dates and memorizing the events and all that stuff. Like it's fine, but how valuable is it if you don't have the critical thinking skills or the compare and contrast skills or the analytical skills, right? To like use that information in a way that actually benefits you in the real world.
Right. And I think too, we would do DBQs, we would do, essays, and we sometimes I think I forgot all the skills that go into writing an essay. Like you have to break down a document, and you have to know the vocabulary, and you have to look at a map and look at it for meaning, and you have to do all those pieces. And I think we were getting on kids for their ability to not write an essay. I'm like, I don't think it's that they can't write an essay. I think it's that they can't do these skills to understand this document. We haven't taught them how to do this. And so we're throwing them an essay and be like, hey, analyze these documents, annotate them, and then write an essay about it. And I'm like, well, these poor kids, they weren't given those skills. And so we didn't teach them that, or like I didn't teach them that. And so I had to have a long kind of conversation with myself and go, am I really setting these kids up for future success if I'm not giving them the skills they need to break down this information? And because you can't think critically if you can't understand what a text is saying, And so,
right.
Yeah. And so that's been my big philosophical change. So I think the first year of MCP was just kind of getting my feet underneath me and figuring out systems. And then this year was a lot of, okay, now what do I do with this curriculum to make it more impactful for kids in the future? And so I feel like as a middle school teacher, I am a foundational element of their future learning. And so I want them to be able to go to high school and be able to have this foundation. And I want them to be able to go to their social studies class or any class with nonfiction in high school and be able to go, okay, I know how to do this. My middle school social studies teacher taught me how to break down a text, so I can do that. And so, whether or not they actually remember that, I don't know, but I hope they do. So it's kind of like, I've got fingers crossed that they'll get there and they'll be like, Mr. Hickox, I remember all the critical reading procedures that he taught me.
I mean, I think like it's interesting that you say that because so like I've mentioned that I just switched from middle school to high school. I'm at the same school, right? And so a lot of the students that I'm teaching are the same ones that I had as middle schoolers, but now they're older. And they remember me, like I think that there's value in, obviously our focus is on learning and we want our students to grow academically. There really is value in like fun, just sort of like silly fun, because that's what they actually do remember. Like if they remember loving your class when they're high school seniors, they will have positive feelings about history, right? Even if they don't want to like go into studying history.
Right.
And that's what they'll carry with them throughout high school. I think that my experience has been that, like kids who had positive experiences in my class, maybe when they were in 6th grade, right? And they didn't have me again until this year, and now they're in 11th grade. Mm-hmm. Like that relationship, weirdly, even though we haven't even really interacted that much, they're obviously much older and much more mature, but like that relationship is still there and they remember that. They're not going to remember the specific music like knowledge that I taught them, right?
Which always makes you a little bit sad too. You're kind of like,
right, I know.
Right.
Well, it makes me question, like, actually, how valuable is this, right? Because what really matters, I really do think, like, it matters that they enjoy school, that kids enjoy school, all of them, right? Because that's how you build lifelong learners. Like, if you make it something that's miserable, obviously they're not going to want to do it. They're going to go home and like want to escape school. But if you make it fun, especially when they're at that age when like they want to like play and run around, they'll carry that with them for a long time, maybe forever.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree. Like I feel like that's absolutely spot on. Like that process of almost leaning into the chaos a little bit of what it means to be a middle schooler is like such an important part of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Like you kind of look around and you go, oh my gosh, they're so crazy. And I'm like, yes, they're 12, they're 13, they're 14. And I sometimes find myself, even with my little kids, my son, my 2 sons and my daughter, my wife always tells me, she's like, you treat them like they're adults. Like they're not adults. They're not there. And like, so sometimes as a teacher, it's hard because if I could just take my brain and my logic and just implant it into your brain, like everything would go so much more smoothly. And then, but also it wouldn't, because it actually wouldn't, but like in my head, I think that it will. And so I'm like, you could just see from my perspective, if you could see it, I can see your future right now. And I just want you to be able to see it. And so I think but you're right though. I mean, I think, finding those things to make kids enjoy being at school. And that was, and that was funny. You say that after this guerrilla warfare thing, I ran down the hall to my coworker and I was like, I'm never doing this ever again. I'm never doing this again. And he was like, listen, at the end of the day, I'm glad that they want to be here. And I was like, that's totally true. I'm like, at the end of the day, I'm like, they want to be here. And that is so valuable. And I'm like, that's true. I got to stop being so like in my own discomfort and be more like lean into that process of being like, they want to be here and they want to be in school. And there's something about that process that's great. And we had this whole great structure because at any time someone can jump into that. And so a kid can cannonball in tomorrow into my classroom, pick up and be like, hey, we're working on this. So welcome. And here you go. And I won't feel like they're missing out. So I think it's definitely been a lot of processing through those different pieces. Middle schoolers, they're fun.
Yeah. They are. I do sort of miss the middle schoolers sometimes. That's right. And I'm sure that these kids will remember what guerrilla warfare is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't think that's going anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey there, listeners. It's Zach, dropping in with some announcements and reminders for you. Do you want to connect with other educators of color who are creating a more student-centered learning environment? Join our Shades of Excellence meetup on Monday, February 24th at 7 p.m. Eastern. Do the students in your community have different needs? In a diverse world, that's inevitable, but it can also feel impossible for a teacher or school to meet every learner's needs at once. But there are evidence-based ways to help every student achieve their potential. In this Ed Leader panel, you'll discover classroom-tested techniques that your teachers can use right away to keep each of their students appropriately challenged and appropriately supported every day. Join us on February 25th at 5 p.m. Eastern. Speaking of meeting every learner's needs, we're reading Rob Barnett's book, Meet Every Learner's Needs, together as a community, and our second session for the book club is on redesigning courses, and it's sponsored by ScreenPal on Wednesday, March 5th at 7 p.m. Eastern. There are links in the show notes where you can sign up for all of this, and you can find more info there. But for now, let's get back into it with Carson. So I want to talk a little bit more about your collaboration with this coworker of yours. And you also mentioned that there's a PLC process that your school is implementing. You've already talked quite a bit about collaborating with your coworker, but just sort of more explicitly, can we talk about that a little bit? And can you tell me more about how that has gone, co-planning in a modern classroom, especially when you're in different content areas? That's interesting to me.
Yeah. So he teaches social studies.
Oh, sorry.
As well.
So then you're not in I thought you said he was ELA.
He was. So he teaches ELA and social studies. So I teach just social studies. He teaches both. But he's an old language arts teacher. He got kind of thrown into social studies as like a secondary thing. And I hope he never leaves, because if he leaves, I'm going to miss him so much. Yeah, but I think what he brings to the table, his experience, he's taught for like 20 years. And so he's way more seasoned, just in like the tactics and the art of like how to bring in skills and like explicitly teach those things. So that for me is like a huge resource, because I would still, I think, be in the weeds a little bit if I didn't know that. But I think, so what we did last year was we just divvied up the workload. So one of the great things about Modern Classroom, and I feel very comfortable ranting and raving about Modern Classrooms, because fundamentally it's transformed the way that I teach, because I had to. Like you can't be like, it's okay, I'll just have them do a packet. You're like, that's not an option. Like you're like, you got to be ready to go. Fully. And yeah, you got to be like, hey, in a month we're going to be here. So, but the first couple of years feel like you're always kind of catching up. You're kind of always like, oh, okay, and then you just finished planning this first unit, and then you're a week into the new unit, you're like, okay, well, we got to start planning the next unit, because that's going to creep up on us here in a month or so. And so Randy and I, my coworker Randy, we had a really good system last year, just kind of leapfrogging each other with each lesson. So like I would do the first lesson, you would do the second lesson, and we would have a guided notes, we would have a practice, and we would have a mastery check. We would have like a written mastery check and like a multiple choice mastery check. That was just kind of like, do you know the content or not? And then a written one that was more like argumentative writing, evidence-based stuff. And so that was our rhythm Monday through Friday. We tweaked that now and kind of slimmed it down, but that process of being like, okay, so I'm going to do this lesson, but before we would sit down, we would go down to like a bar in Redmond, and we would sit and be like, okay, let's plan out Greece. And a bunch of nerds, two nerds just sitting there talking about Greece for 2 hours, drinking kombucha and being like, yeah. Like, hey.
I love teachers, man. Teachers are so cool.
Yeah. Everybody's looking around like, what are these guys doing? Like, yeah. Anyway, just a bunch of weirdos, just talking Greece, talking Rome. And like you do on a Friday with your friends. And so we would just sit there and we would just be like, okay, we're going to work backwards. So what's our end goal with this unit? How are they going to show what they know? Are they going to do an essay? Are they going to do a project? He comes from a project-based learning background, which has been cool to kind of like dabble into that world a little bit. And so we would just have those conversations. We'd map it out. We would go, okay, lesson one's going to be this, and we're going to accomplish. We'd have 4 or 5 learning goals for the unit. And then we would have each lesson be one of those learning goals and be like, okay, so lesson 1's going to do this. Lesson 2 is going to do this. Lesson 3 is going to do this. Lesson 4 is going to do this. It was really good. I think we did too much. Like, I think we honestly in our first year tried to like change the world with our teaching, like in the sense of like, let's cover everything all the time and do all of it at once. And I think this year we've learned a little bit more about how we can distill information down. But yeah, so that was that practice with him, and it was great because, we were looking at, we were doing universal, we were doing backwards design without really knowing that it was backwards design. We were sitting there, building our tables and mapping out our units and putting our learning goals in, and what vocabulary are they going to know? And it just felt really nice to be with somebody else in that process. And we were this is terrible. We were calling each other at 10 o'clock at night, like, hey, I've got an idea for this next lesson. It was like Mad Men. We were just like, oh, I've got an idea for this next thing. And we were talking through, so it was really fun. It was really exciting. It's kind of like that chaos of doing something new that kind of gets you to kind of keep going, like, oh man, this is going to be great. And like the kids obviously didn't always respond the way that I wanted them to, like with the same equal excitement as I had. But when we were going back and forth, we were having a lot of fun. I remember we did this lesson where we taught the 3 Chinese philosophies of Taoism, Confucianism, and legalism. And instead of like having them read, we did our guided notes videos like one of those philosophies. So it was like, it didn't pan out the way we thought, but it was fun. It didn't pan out the way we hoped it would. But so like for legalism, we came in and we were just like yelling, like, everybody write this down. And then for Taoism, we were super like calm and mellow. But it didn't really go the way we wanted it to, but at the same time, it was just like Randy and I had a great time, and working together with each other was a lot of fun. So, so I think that process of working with him has been great. And then now, we're working through in our PLC, which is like a professional learning community. We have a lot to work on. We have a lot to piece together, and our school is in like year 3 of implementing a PLC process. And so as a school, we've just all kind of like grown as teachers, like just to be more like, we had a great conversation. This is another great thing about the model in our PLC process. Last year, we had this conversation around formative assessments, and we're like, well, you got to have formative assessments for your PLC. You need to know what they're learning and how they're mastering stuff. And there's all these people so everybody else in the room is kind of like, formative assessments, are all talking about it. And Randy and I just look at each other and we go, yeah, that's what we're doing every week. Like, it's just baked into it. We're not creating anything new. It's just part of what we're doing. And so I think Randy looked at me and he goes, kablooey. Like we're already doing that. And then, so this last PLC meeting, that was conversation around tier 2 interventions. Like, what do you do if kids don't know it? And how do you extend learning? And I'm like, already got it. Already built it in. Yeah, it's already there.
I love this about modern classrooms. This is sort of a little bit of a tangent, but I feel like Kareem and Rob somehow like hit on education gold. I don't understand how they did it, but they did it. And like, there's so many teacher buzzwords, right? You mentioned differentiation, and all these things, formative assessment, all this stuff that MCP teachers are just like, yeah, we do that. Like, we got that. We already know.
Yeah, we have to. It's like, if you don't, I don't know what's happening. You know what I mean? And so, they're like, oh, you got to build a choice board for what they do when they're done. And I'm like, yep, got that. And they're like, what do you do if they don't learn it? What we do is small group instruction. Like, how do you do that? It's like, well, I'm teaching through a video. So the kids are rolling and I'm sitting in the back classroom with them and we're sitting down and we're working through it together. So we're differentiating there. And I think, it's just crazy. I mean, it was, and I didn't know that when I first started doing it. Like, I wasn't down that deep of a road with like the PLC process to understand that. But then as I got into it, in a lot of ways, I was so blessed to move here and be put into that situation, because when I started teaching with MCP, it was like, oh my gosh, everything that you want to do with effective teaching just all started to merge together. And I was just like, okay, so I am doing this. Even though I don't know what a formative assessment is, I'm like, I am doing that. And even though I don't know what this, extension piece is, I am doing that. And so it was kind of trippy to be like, oh my gosh, we are doing these things that are effective. And so, it's been really great. It's for that process. So our PLC is still working through that, because Randy and I are doing MCP. The other 2 guys we teach with are teaching a more of a traditional model. And so we're really working through how to link what we're doing with what they're doing too, just so we can stay aligned within our, not step for step, but stay aligned as far as what we're assessing, what we're working through, which is a process and learning. So it's like turning a cruise ship. That's the big thing I've been told, is like, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a very slow kind of tweaking as you go along. So
like course correcting. I've always liked that metaphor of like, you slowly drift back on course, right? Or you change your course slowly. Yeah. And I love the like, kind of just like throw all the spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks approach too. I think that you mentioned this before. I think that middle schoolers are like uniquely flexible and accommodating of that. I don't know. I've never taught elementary. I feel like they probably need more structure, especially the younger ones. And then high schoolers, I feel like might not have the patience for it, right? Because they are like, my experience has been like they're just like down to business, basically. Like they just, and obviously there's always students that don't want to do the work, and you have to work with them, right? But like middle school is an age where the teacher can like they just bounce back. Like you something totally bombs one day, and they come back the next day, and they're like totally have moved past it and ready to go with whatever's next.
Yeah, it's remarkable. And I appreciate that you say that too, because I feel like I just had a conversation with I had a student teacher in the fall, and she was teaching with me here, and she was, so she was thrown into this model being like, okay, this is what we're doing. I'll support you. Don't worry about teaching from the front, just worry about classroom management, whatever. And now she's at a high school, and she's like, middle schoolers, I couldn't get to stop talking, and high schoolers, I can't get to start talking. So I'm like,
that was my experience.
I'm like, that's true, Yeah,
it's weird.
So I appreciate, because I feel like they're so candid, they're so just like blunt, and I just like we have discussions. This is why like doing things like debates and philosophical chairs and Socratic seminars are awesome with middle schoolers, because they just like let it fly. And I'm like, I like it. Just it's lively. It's going. I don't know how like whether it's directed or not, but they're middle schoolers are like this river, and you're like, I just got to somehow keep you from overflowing, but we'll just let you keep going. And so it's been, great for that too. I couldn't even imagine doing this at a different level, but so, you probably have that process too of what it's like to teach at a different level now, and what it looks like to change up how you're doing things for a different age group.
Yeah. It's taking me time to shift gears. I'm not going to lie. At this point, it's been a semester, and like, I'm happier in high school now, but like looking at middle school now, I'm like, it's wild down there, like it's just wild. And I was part of it. Like I was just in that and thought it was normal. Like I thought and now I'm like, oh wow. Like that. Yeah. So anyway,
cause you know what it's like, right? Someone meets you at a bar and they go like, I'm at bars too much apparently, but like, when you meet people and you go, hey, what do you teach? Like they teach middle school, and they're like, oh wow. People just don't do that when you teach other grades. I don't know what it is about it. They're like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, yeah, well, it's just kind of my normal. I don't know what to say.
Yeah. You don't realize it. If you ever go to high school, you'll look at middle school and be like, how did I do that? Like what would, anyway.
Right. I'm still here.
No, it's fun. Yeah. It's definitely fun. Part of my like spirit stayed in middle school, I think. And some of the high schoolers are like, Mr. Diamond, you're kind of weird. Like, why did you say that? They're like, did you just say skibbity? Never say that. Yeah. No, don't ever say that to us. Anyway,
that's the best part about teaching middle school. You can drop all that lingo, and they appreciate it.
Oh man, yeah, I do miss the middle schoolers. It's a fun time down there, and it sounds like the way that you are approaching this is very like middle school appropriate, right? Like, let them have fun, try stuff out.
Yeah,
and you're also recognizing, right, like when you've pushed too far, right? And I love that. So my last question for you is what you hope to see in the future. And I think that's like particularly apt here, right? Because you've talked a lot about how the first year was like sort of just like on the fly, just doing this total chaos kind of thing. And then this year you're refining. So like what comes next year and then beyond? Like what goals do you have for your modern classroom after this year?
Yeah. I think we're still learning. Like we're still learning a lot about how to do it. And I think we're also seeing the difference. So we just had a conversation recently in our district and about some data from like the country as a whole, and specifically Oregon, that like we just took a snapshot of math scores pre-pandemic and then afterwards, and there's a 30% decrease in achievement in math, and that's probably across a lot of domains. Like that's not just math, but I think I'm hopeful. Like it's hard to say, because I think a lot of things about education for me I feel sometimes there are things that I can't control, and that's really hard. There's so many variables that you can't change. So like what happens to a kid when they go home, what they read when they were kids, what grade they were in when COVID happened, so we're seeing these cohorts come through, and now our 7th graders have started to get a lot more academically, like I think stronger than our 8th graders were. And so we're seeing this like difference. So I've done a couple lessons that are the same for 7th graders and 8th graders, just to kind of see like what happens. And I've seen the 7th graders basically operate at the same level as the 8th graders, because the skill is new to both of them. And so like, I think I'm just hopeful that like next year I won't have to do as much of the skill teaching with this group of 7th graders. I'll be able to like refresh it and kind of lock it in, but then we'll be able to do a lot more big discussions and debates within US history. And so I'm like hopeful for that. I'm hopeful that I really want my classroom, and this has always been I think this always like is the challenge with modern classrooms, the things that are hard. One of the things that's difficult is fostering like, and we talk a lot about collaboration, like kids are collaborating naturally, right? They're sharing, they're doing their guide notes together, they're doing their practice together, they're doing X, Y, and Z, kind of that natural business and collaboration together, which is great. But I think like specifically within social studies, I want to see the students collaborate. I want to build more of a natural rhythm of collaboration where it's like, we're going to try that with our next unit about the Constitution. And our big goal at the end of it is that kids can have a meaningful debate around a controversial topic and defending their stance with evidence from the Constitution, which is a really heavy lift. That's a huge lift for middle schoolers. And so we're really hoping that we can give them the skills to be able to do that. We're going to practice it throughout the unit, just kind of like debating and, conversations and, pro-con articles and things like that. So, but that means you've got to take time from somewhere else, right? If you're going to do that with your time, you've got to pull from somewhere else. And so we're learning how to make our guided notes videos more succinct and more focused, and our practice more specific, and then having more of our practices be discussions, and then using those as evaluation. Like, I think that's kind of like the kind of sweet like voodoo of like social studies teachers, is being able to be like, I'm going to evaluate you using a discussion as opposed to evaluating you on a multiple choice test, which is a lot harder and maybe it takes more time to be able to do, but finding systems to be able to do that for the classroom. And so I'm hopeful that would be like a big like kind of change. And then I'm just kind of hopeful like my really desire is for, so I don't know how to like say it. It's like, I want to be tactful about this, but I hope that teachers see the model and want to do it. I don't have a dog in the fight. Like I'm not like a spokesperson for Modern Classrooms Project. I just believe in it, and I believe that it's effective. But you have to be kind of delicate about how you approach that. You don't want to, because you're so excited about something. You don't want to be like, this is amazing, and like, this kid's doing great in my class. Why is he doing so bad in your class? He's doing great in mine. It must be this model that I'm doing. And it just puts people in a place of like, you think you're better than me and whatever. And I don't want to have that kind of like tension with the model, because it has so much value, and it has so much like, it speaks for itself. I don't need to do it. It speaks for itself and its impactfulness. And so I'm just trying to be very delicate about that, and trying not to compare it, and trying not to put a position where I'm like pitting traditional classroom teaching versus like a modern classrooms approach and putting them at odds with each other, which is why it's good for our PLC to kind of like, figure out what it looks like to partner in a collaborative environment where you're creating stuff together and you're assessing the same stuff together, but you're also teaching in two different ways. And how you do that requires a lot of tact, and there's a lot of you just be careful. You just gotta be careful about how you do that, so that you don't make something that somebody can't do. Like, I don't create a lesson that like my colleagues can't do in their traditional classroom, and then you're also working through how you assess things. And my principal was really great. He was like, just let the data speak for itself. If the model really is impactful, then if you teach the same thing and your kids come out with a more in-depth knowledge, then that just speaks for itself. You don't need to defend it. You can just go like, this is what it is. And so I'm hopeful that will be more of a thing, and that we'll see some more curiosity around it and some more buy-in. I have some people from our district coming to observe my classroom and see it kind of in action. And I think that's what I'm excited for the model. And I'm also just excited to like get to a third year and be like, okay, I think I kind of have like the model built. I won't have to create as much in my next like coming years. Did a lot of creating these last 2 years, and so I'm hopeful that I can kind of find a rhythm where it's like, okay, I feel like I've kind of got a flow to things a little bit. So yeah, that's what I hope for.
Yeah. I like that a lot. And I like a lot what you said about the sort of tactful approach to sharing the model. I think, as Modern Classrooms has sort of disseminated after the pandemic, especially, like we've really sort of honed in on the way that not honed in. I guess the opposite of that, honestly. Like teachers can implement the model piecemeal, right? Like I think that good teaching practices don't have to be like branded with MCP, you know? And so I think that the idea of a PLC where you're sharing your way of doing things and other teachers are sharing their ways of doing things, like you both have stuff to learn from each other. And I agree with you, right? Like my style of teaching just fits perfectly with MCP, basically the way that it's written, right? And so that's great for me. But, you know, if someone else came in with an equally amazing model and tried to pressure me into changing, I'd kind of bristle at that, right? Like because I'm good. I know what I'm doing now. And I always have a lot more to learn and ways to improve, right? Like that's not what I'm saying, that I'm like perfect or anything, but definitely like sharing is
close though. Close.
Well, we're trying. Like sharing is it, right? Not sharing, not being like, you have to try MCP, you have to try this model. And I feel like MCP as an organization has always sort of had that line. And I remember, they were very adamant at the beginning about not forcing teachers into the training, right? It had to be something that teachers themselves wanted. And yeah, like that makes sense to me because I, as a teacher, like I said, like I don't like being told how to teach. I mean, if I have questions, I want to ask them, you know, but I've been to too many PDs where it's like, this is the way to teach, right? This is the way to do it. Yeah. Well, I don't know. That resonated with me a lot, what you said. And so.
Yeah. And I should have said this at the beginning. I would really encourage people, specifically if you're in Oregon and you're listening to like this podcast, or if you're in another state where you have educational districts, like we have a lot of equity initiatives through Oregon and and our Central Oregon Regional Educators Network here. And I've talked with Sean Aker a couple of times. He's over in the Willamette Valley, did MCP over there and built that. And I was just going to say, like, I got into this. I couldn't afford to step into the model. Like I just couldn't afford to pay to do that program. And so I went to our regional educators network and was like, hey, I've got this idea to do this model. It's proven, it's data driven, it has evidence that it's worked. I think it'd be a great way to as an equity measure to support all students. We talk about that all the time. We got to support all students, and teachers just go, how? You know what I mean? And so having that resource of being like, we'll pay for you to do this virtual mentorship program. We'll help you get this. We'll help you get headphones for your classrooms that you can. Those little logistical things, like those are barriers. But I mean, to call them and be like, hey, I need, I have two other colleagues doing, I need 60 more headphones. They're like, sure, we'll buy them for you. We'll get you that. And so I think like that's been a huge just resource. I mean, I don't know, like if I didn't have that, it would have been a lot harder to do this. And so I'm really thankful that there was resources like that available. And I would just encourage people, this is making learning possible for everyone. This is making it accessible for kids to be able to do learning. And it's hard. You got to give up a little bit of yourself. You like to be in front of people. You're going to have to let that go. But I do think that, it's so meaningful, and the most equitable thing we can do is give people access to education and give them access to a quality education and quality teachers. And so finding that path to it has been, huge for me. And so, it's been, amazing. I just like shout out to my regional educators network, shout out to my coworker, shout out to Megan Remmel, who was my mentor for the program, and, to everyone that's kind of helped, because this last year was so hard, and it was so hard. I don't want to say it was hard. It was challenging. It was stretching. But it was so meaningful. And the community of people I had around me just made that I wouldn't have been able to do it without the people that came to support me. So if they're listening to it, I just would tell them that I appreciate so much that the help that they gave me. And Amy Yoakum in Sacramento, just that she would share all of her magical lessons she made with me to use. I'm just like, this is crazy. So just super appreciative of all those things. That community is so important.
Yeah.
And it's been great. So.
Yeah, no, the Modern Classrooms community is really strong. Carson, do you have any resources for those Oregon programs, like those state programs that you mentioned, that you could share?
Mm-hmm. So we have several. I mean, I hope that people know this in Oregon specifically, but we have several regional educator networks. So they're like there's a state fund for regional educators network. As far as I know, I don't know all the magic about it, but I know there's funds that are given to basically regional or educational districts. So we have our Redmond, Bend, Madras, Cook County sisters districts, and there's an umbrella organization called the High Desert Educational Service District, and the Ren falls under that. There's those throughout the state, and these they fund these things called change ideas.
Oh, cool.
So you'll be like, hey, I need $1,000 to do this at my school. And you kind of make them a proposal, and you say, and if they have the funds to be able to do it, like, hey, I need these resources to be able to do that. I'm on the board for our one here in the one in here in Central Oregon. And so I was like, hey, I have this idea. I need X amount of money to be able to pull it off. Because I had headphones, but they just kept breaking. So I was like, I need to get some like headphones I can twist and bend and rip and wrench around and they won't break. And so they got me these awesome headphones that are indestructible. So kids can just do whatever they want with them and they won't break. And so they funded me to do that. And so I would just encourage, reach out to those. I know and I think the Willamette Valley ESD, which was my friend Sean that was doing that. They actually they gave people a stipend to do the virtual mentorship program. So that if teachers wanted to, it was available to them. That's a big part of it too, is like just making sure like it's gotta be teacher driven. As soon as for better or for worse, as soon as the bosses step in and like, hey, we're doing this, it's like, oh, I'm already out.
100%. Exactly. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And so letting it be teacher driven, that's what I've always appreciated about it. It's kind of raw and it's gritty and it's video. I mean, I made a video at 3:00 in the morning at the Austin airport because I forgot to make my video and I was on vacation. I had to stop and make a video at 2:00 in the morning and be like, I'm just gonna do it right here in the airport. It's like, that's just kind of, that's part of the process, is like, it's not polished, it's not perfect. And so I think people seeing that is really, and the kids seeing that too, I think is really important too, like all sorts of mistakes that are made, so yeah.
Cool. Well, so this has been incredible. What a great discussion. And I love these podcast episodes where we get to kind of like talk about the nitty gritty of like how it goes, like rolling it out, collaborating, planning, and all this stuff. This has been incredible, Carson. Thank you so much. How you mentioned the community also. So if our listeners wanted to connect with you, how could they do that? Yeah.
Please reach out. Like if you need anything, if I can help, with whatever it can help with. You can reach me at carson.hickox, carson.hickox at modernclassrooms.org. I think I have an Instagram account. It's just my first and last name, Carson Hickox. Is it at Instagram? I'm glad I don't have a weird Instagram handle, so that's good. Just my normal name, Instagram, and then I have. I think that's really. Oh, I'm on Strava. I know. You can find me on Strava if you want to follow me running too. I know Sean did that with his, so if you want to follow me on Strava, well, you're welcome to hit me up on Strava as well and follow all my cool routes. We can compete with each other. That'd be fun.
I will drop all of these in the show notes. Well, again, thank you so much, Carson. This has been incredible. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of your experiences.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And thank you. And Tony Rose, I mean, I listen, and I said this at the start of the podcast, I've listened to this podcast on my runs, on driving, commuting for the last year and a half. And it's hearing all the other teachers. I took a lot of stuff from other teachers. And so I appreciate you guys taking time to do this because it's been really meaningful for me. So I appreciate it a lot.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I feel like that's kind of why we do it, right? Like I learn the best from I feel like that's in the intro, right? Like we learn best from each other. And that's what this whole thing is for, just to talk about how it is, so awesome. Well, listeners, remember, you can always email us at podcast@modernclassrooms.org, and you can find the show notes for this episode at podcast.modernclassrooms.org. We'll have this episode's recap and transcript uploaded to the Modern Classrooms blog on Friday, so be sure to check there or check back in the show notes for this episode if you'd like to access those. Also, we're asking our listeners to leave a review if this podcast has been helpful in supporting you to create a blended, self-paced, mastery-based learning environment, because that does help other folks find the podcast. Thank you all for listening. Have a great week, and we'll be back next Sunday. Thank you so much for listening. You can find links to topics and tools we discussed in our show notes for this episode. And remember, you can learn more about our work at www.modernclassrooms.org And you can learn the essentials of our model through our free course at learn.modernclassrooms.org. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Modern Class Proj. That's Proj. We are so appreciative of all you do for students and schools. Have a great week, and we'll be back next Sunday with another episode of the Modern Classrooms Project podcast.